evening, everyone. Jason, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you to you, Craig, Chelsea, the entire team at Denos hosting this exhibition and for inviting me to participate. I think I want to, I just really want to jump right in, Kevin. Thank you for working with me and talking with me about your work. In the call that I put out, talked about what happened during 2021 and how were artists responding to that, to what I call the dynamic state that we're in. So would you start us off by sharing what was your experience, what inspired this particular piece, Michigan Shoreline?
So the work is really inspired by my own experiences in nature. I go camping every summer down on the shoreline of Lake Michigan, and there's this one particular experience where I was out for a morning swim, and I was standing there at the shore. I was feeling the wind coming in, listening, and just kind of being there. And I heard this kind of real subtle ringing sound, and I couldn't identify what it was. And it was, was it a pole, a flagpole somewhere? Was it something resonating? Was it this or that? And it was just one of those experiences where as I listened to that sound and I listened further and further away and my awareness kind of expanded, you're just real aware of, first you're aware of your body as the interface that's helping you sense all of these things. But then you're also aware of that interface dropping, right? And you feel totally in the moment. And it's a subtle experience, but it's also a kind of a sublime, transcendent experience. And I just stood there for a while and I thought, okay, how do I share this? How do I share this experience with people, right? How do I kind of smuggle this transcendence that's happening out there in nature with me alone? How do I bring that back into the world and share it, right? And what's the appropriate medium for that kind of an experience? And for me, it's this kind of sculptural installation sound piece, because that's in some ways is the materials that I'm working with in my art practice.
You described that moment as, very subtle and yet immersive, right? And then you are taking that experience and trying to share it, right? So that's a very complex thing right there, right? And you can maybe just approach, what you felt in however you put it together, because it's not a documentation, it's not a recording of your experience. You're trying to share it with the tools that you have. So talk to us about, that process of creating that experience. What did you bring in? What were your different composite pieces in your practice that came together for this piece?
Sure. So there's a long, tradition of landscape, and I'm working in this tradition too. We'll talk about that, but this long tradition of landscape painting, even now with the ubiquity of social media, I can take a photo, I could do a recording, but those things didn't communicate. I had plenty of photos and videos and recordings from camping trips, but those things to me didn't communicate the feeling that I felt, right? It's not really an accurate representation of the essence of that experience, right? So how do I do that? So I come home from this trip and it's kind of urgent, like, okay, how do I make this sound? How do I get back into this feeling of this perceptual space? And I don't do it by recreating it or simulating it. I've got these things around me because I'm engaged in the sound art practice. Say, okay, I'm working with these transducers to vibrate things, to resonate this symbol. I've got these noise generators, and it's all, so there's a connection there. So how can I get this stuff together and reproduce this feeling? Because I want to share it, but I also want to feel it again, right? So it's an inspirational sound. Like, how do I get back to that experience? And so I cobble together these things that I have right? Most of these things existed in some sense or another, had been created for another art project, or I've been using in my practice, or I was using for educational purposes. And yeah, and then it just came together this way. And I pulled the bricks from the backyard. I pulled the log off the beach, and I found that kind of emergent property in these things that were thrown together in the same way that all these things on the beach kind of just came together at that moment, right? That started feeling these things. So how do I put these things together? And hopefully I find a relationship between these objects that gives whoever's viewing it enough to get into it, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a great way to kind of pause there for a moment, because, as you're describing these different, this array of different objects that each have their own kind of visuals and sculptural qualities. I'm reminded when I first encountered the piece, which was a total digital experience, right? And yet I was drawn in, to what I'm calling a micro world, because the pieces, as you arrange them, they definitely have a sculptural, aesthetic dynamic, that drew me in. And I immediately, I was on the beach, I saw the sound elements, and I was hearing before I listened to the audio, it triggered the sounds of the shoreline for me. So I think it's a very engaging piece, that with these elements that you kind of drew me into it. Can you describe some of the traditions, some of the practices, theoretical or that you've encountered as an artist, that this piece may fit into? Because it's unusual for this show, not unusual for different shows focused on sound, but I think it was unusual to encounter it here.
Yeah, sure. I think maybe, for maybe our audience, I'm not sure who they are, but I think maybe for our audience, the best way in is through other landscape focused practices. So maybe we start with Impressionism, right? We might start with Turner as a precursor to maybe Monet, and we think of Impression Sunrise, which is a well-known piece, right? Where we start to get away from this representation of the scene, and we start to look at the atmosphere, right? And the feeling and the energy in an environmental landscape. And then we might move from there, right, into the light and space school. Maybe talk to somebody about Robert Irwin or Larry Bell. We're making traditional minimalist now. We're into minimalist sculptures that are primarily dealing with this idea of perception, right? And this idea of how do I draw the viewer in to start to feel and be aware of how they're perceiving the environment. So that's where I'm taking, okay, I want to communicate the essence of this space, right? It's about the environment, it's about the landscape, but I want to do it by thinking about perception. So I've got sound, but I've got this fan, and I've got a structural, sculptural element here. So that's one way into it, right? But another way into it is not just about the landscape, right? It's also about the body, right? And the body in space, and the body's relationship to the landscape. And especially during COVID and thinking about the theme of the show, I was thinking about Anna Mendieta. So we think about her silhouette series particularly. So she's an exile from Cuba. She's working in kind of mid-century in America. She's coming here after the revolution, though, and she's doing work about her body, right? She's doing work about her body in nature, right? As a refuge from these kind of oppressive forces in the world that would inscribe these power relationships onto your body. Your home, she felt exiled in this country. And where do you find home? You find home with the earth, right? And so she was reclaiming her body in the earth, with the earth, essentially. But there's a second component to it, right? So you can escape the world into the nature, right? You negate this, I'm not what you say I am who I believe I am in this body. And then the third negation is I am this body drops and I am one with nature, right? There's this energy, there's force that she talked about in this kind of earth body work that she was connecting with. And to me, that's kind of analogous to my experience, right? It's experience that a lot of us have in nature, right? We escape from the world, we think, right, into ourselves, and then we realize that this is kind of a shell, and it evaporates once we're fully present out there in nature.
I appreciate your kind of expounding upon the body when you look at this work, right? Because as I was mentioning my own experience with it, you know, once I heard the sound and it was there with the fan, the kind of motion in the air against that driftwood, you know, I had my own kind of experience where my body, you know, the sound is interacting with my body, right? So you have the visuals that you take it in, you know, the physical spatial sense of it, and yet your body is actually interacting with the piece in some way.
What I like about it is there's a particular quality to those like kind of far away sounds, right? And this recreates that. So I come into the space and I hear this far away sound, right? And this idea of I'm here, the sound is here, the work is here, the wind is here. You know, it's this kind of matrix of, and I'm having to position myself. There's this kind of proprioception involved, like where am I standing? Where is this? Where is the work? And I think that's important. It's nice to be. So I grew up here in Traverse City, and the museum was new when I was in school, and that's the museum that we went to, and my art teachers who have worked in the show. So Dan Lissick and Sherry Carell they're in the show, but they also took us to the museum, and it's kind of a cool kind of full circle thing. You know, it's like I sat in that museum with Dan Lissick and Judy Chicago and a group of, you know, small group of students once, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I've got this piece in the museum I can talk to people about, and I get to go in there and turn the knobs and do all the stuff that I've been doing in fields and woods and in basements, but now it's in the museum. So it's just a nice experience, right? It's artwork about this place, and now it's in this place, and I can direct people to it. So,
I think one of the things that I'm so happy that you agreed to speak with us tonight and to share some of the details and process about the work is that, you know, there is an abstract nature to it when you encounter it. And I think for many of us, when we approach something that is unusual, that we're not familiar with, there's a tendency to shy away, especially in a museum. You know, if you're approaching an artwork, I think a lot of abstract artwork, you know, mid-century modern, other conceptual pieces where the viewer comes across it and there's a hesitancy if you feel like you don't get it, right? And you don't want it to be embarrassed that you don't get it, right? So you're gonna keep going on, and then maybe you have to approach it sideways or something like a crab. But I find that hesitancy for something that's unusual. You know, that's why I love the whole idea that you're opening this up for us and sharing what it is and what may be from our individual encounters. Do you run across just like people it's just so unique and off the beaten track in an art gallery that there's a hesitancy, and then once it's explained, oh my goodness, you're opening up all these new worlds for people.
Yeah, let me respond to that, and I think I can. I see two questions in the chat. I think I can answer them and respond to your question all at the same time. So I had this experience when I was in there after we did the performance for the docents. I was packing my stuff up, and that's always a cool time. It's kind of a neat connection to performance, right? Always that period after somebody plays and they're packing their stuff up, and the people that really liked the show come up and talk to you, or you go talk to that person and go, hey man, that was a sweet set or whatever. And so I'm packing up, and this group of, I don't know, 6 or 8 kids, they look like elementary school kids. And so I'm packing up on one side of the piece, and they're on the other side of the piece behind the black line, just looking at me. And I go, oh, okay, hey, what's up? And I go, what is it? right? Because they're kids, they don't care. They ask, they would say, well, it's just artwork, and they were kind of looking, they didn't really get it. So I said, okay, come over here to this end, and stand so where the fan is blowing on you, and close your eyes. And they had a lot of energy. So I was like, okay, let's take a breath for a second and listen to this. And one of the kids they go, oh, it's like the beach. And I go, yeah, there you go, I got it, it works. And they ran off to tell their parent who was there, right? But their parent was not feeling it, right? Their parent wasn't they were open to it, right? So it's about, because it's about this kind of openness and this fit, you have to be a little bit open to it at the same time.